I'm Mark Stanley, author of Creating World-Class Red Wine, available on Amazon, Kindle and paperback. And today we're going to discuss basic Brix reading, basic sugar readings for red wine, which would be the same thing for white wines. So we're also going to take accurate pH readings with a good pH meter. And the focus here is on how to do a little bit better job. This video is really targeted towards the home winemaker and also the small winery owners that have never really been schooled. I go in a lot of your tasting rooms and you're doing a really great job, and I fully support you, but sometimes I see quite a bit of home winemaker techniques being used. And so this is just to help you improve your style a little bit. Well, so what is a hydrometer? Here is a full range hydrometer that I actually don't use very often. It's a high quality hydrometer. This one is a 0 to 35 Brix range. It's about a $20 hydrometer. First of all, home winemakers, I would recommend that you get a better hydrometer. A lot of those $7 triple range hydrometers are notoriously inaccurate. So whatever scale you like to work in, whether it's Brix or specific gravity, buy a better hydrometer. This is only about $15 or $20. It'll serve you well. Okay? And then, well, what is the difference between specific gravity and Brix? Well, it's really just like the difference between inches and millimeters. It's just a different way of measuring it. It's just really a difference in between this piece of paper that's glued inside this glassware, right? In France, they use Baume. In Germany, they use Oshel. Then we have specific gravity that the brewmeisters like a lot. Beer makers talk specific gravity, and winemakers tend to gravitate more towards the Brix scale. So what is Brix? Brix is basically pretty much close to actual sugar content. So this juice is 24 Brix. I already checked it. And so that means this juice is actually 24% sugar. So how does this thing work? It floats in the juice, and it floats higher when there's more sugar in the juice. If you put sugar in a gallon of water, it's heavier than a gallon of plain water. Honey is really heavy. So the more sugar there is in this, the higher the thing floats. That's all it is. It's very simple and it's accurate. And what I'm actually using today is a narrow range hydrometer that's from 19 to 31 Brix. I want an accurate reading for my original Brix or original specific gravity reading. I've got 2 tons of Malbec in there that this juice came off of, and I want an accurate reading for it. I'm in Washington State. These grapes came from Rattlesnake Hills AVA in eastern Washington. It's hot over there. I deal with a lot of high pH and high Brix fruit. But this hydrometer has a 20 degrees centigrade temperature accuracy. So I actually, with a heat gun, brought this liquid up to 20 degrees centigrade. You can do a mathematical temperature correction calculation. Some of these fancy hydrometers, this is only about a $20 hydrometer, have a little thermometer inside for your temperature correction. If you want to do it very accurately, do the temperature correction or make the juice itself whatever temperature the hydrometer is calibrated at. So I'm going to float it in here and give it a little spin to get rid of the air bubbles if there's any. And yeah, it's reading 24 Brix. And that's good. I'm pleased with that. That's about 13% potential alcohol in the wine. And so I used, to get this, I used this thermometer. This is a chef's thermometer that you should all have. This thing is like manacled to my wrist with a silver manacle all through winemaking season. It's my best friend. And these are very accurate. It's only about $12, $15 for one of these things. And you home winemakers that have those thermometers with the big long stem, stainless steel stems, and the thing on top, those are designed for compost piles. Put it in the garden stuff. They're not accurate. Get yourself a nice digital thermometer. This thing reads out in tenths and reads accurately, and it's long enough to push down into the cap of a fermenter. Okay? So, I want accuracy in the upper range. I also want accuracy in the lower range. And so when when the yeasts ferment all this sugar out of here, I want the fermenter to ferment dry. Meaning, my target in the Brix range is -2 Brix. I usually don't get there. It usually gets down to about -1.5. In specific gravity terms, I believe that's 0.995 ideally, but I would probably usually only hit 0.997. Below zero? How can you be below zero? The alcohol in the wine or the beer skews the reading. So you ever wonder why your hydrometer goes down below zero? Well, that's why. And home winemakers, you keep passing this fallacy around that you should stop the fermentation and press at 1 or 2 Brix. Well, I don't know wherever that idea came from, but professional winemakers want their fermentations, whether it's white or red, to ferment down below zero. And I think the pros know better than you home winemakers. All those books keep passing around all this misleading information. That's why I wrote this book, really, to combat mediocrity. Well, but what really happens? What happens is the yeasts, first they start, if there's any citric acid in here at all, the first thing they'll do is consume that. That's like candy for yeast. And then there's pretty much an equal percentage of fructose and glucose in any given red fermentation, plus or minus. The first thing they eat is the fructose after the citric acid, and then they finally metabolize the glucose, and what's left? When you get down to 1 or 2 Brix, it's the exotic sugars like arabinose, rambose, xylose. Well, and the yeasts are kind of like, maybe I don't feel like eating that. Well, hey, you're going to stay at the breakfast, you're going to stay at the table until you finish your arabinose. Well, we're encouraging them to do that, right? And because we want it to be dry. If there's any residual sugars left at the end of the fermentation, they're subject to being eaten by undesirable bacteria. And no, malolactic fermentation bacteria that comes on later, there's still debate amongst the chemists, and I won't even go there, concerning if they feed on any sugars or not, but we do know that there's a major conversion of acids with malolactic fermentation. We want the fermentation to ferment dry. Right? Unless, of course, you're a jug winemaker, or and there's a lot of that, and or make fortified wine, or you port makers, or sauterne makers, magnifique, or any other dessert wines. That's a different story, and we're not covering that today. But that's the basic Brix measurement. It's just checking for sugars, and the original Brix is very important. So the next part of this video, we're going to do a pH reading accurately. All right, now I'm going to check the pH in the Malbec. And the pH is really important, along with titratable acidity, but the pH is really the strength of the acid, or the titratable acidity is more what you taste in a wine. And they usually work in tandem. The TA comes down and the pH goes up over time. I mean, there are those grapes like Nebbiolo that has a reputation for having both high pH and high TA at the same time. But this is Malbec. It behaves very beautifully. It's an ancient grape from Cahors, France. Back in the Middle Ages, it was one of the best wines in France from Cahors. Before Left Bank Bordeaux even existed, before there was Cabernet Sauvignon, Malbec was a queen of Western France. And it's got a lot of color, a lot of tannin, kind of a nuttiness, and a little bit of rusticness that I like it. Anyway. How do you get an accurate pH reading? Well, if you just check the juice, I've got fermenters in there that I just destemmed and crushed yesterday. So the juice has all the sugar in it right now, but the skins have the flavor and the phenolics from the skin have yet to integrate in with the wine. And so if you just check the pH of the juice is much more acidic than the skins. So how do we get an accurate pH reading? One of the ways is to wait a few days, say 4 days into cold soak after you've crushed the grapes, and take a pH reading then, and you get a reasonable reading. But in the last 20 years or so, a lot of winemakers have used the blender technique, where I take the grapes, put them in a blender, and blend them up, and blend it up, and make a slurry that more approximates the accurate pH of what we have right now. And I really want to know what the pH is, because as the wine ferments, in 3 weeks, the pH will go up about 0.12 pH. Like, let's say this is 3.5, and at the end of fermentation, the pH of the wine will be 3.62. And then 2-3 months later, after ML is over, it'll go up another 0.13 or so you'll end up at 3.75, right? And so I need to know what it is now to plan for the future. If the pH is too high, I'll have to add some tartaric acid, very carefully. That's in another video, the dance with the acid queen. But right now, we're checking the pH by blending it up in a blender. So let's do that. Oh, here, I got to talk about pH meters first. You really aren't getting an accurate reading. You cannot rely on a pH meter that costs less than $200 or even $300. The ones in the $200 to $300 range are really... it's hard to get a consistent reading on them. Sometimes they work. The $100 models, those pH meters, home winemakers, you can't rely on them. You're wasting your money and your time. And I hate to say it, but that's true. You really need a pH meter with a separate probe. The probe is the technology. The probe is the artistic part of the pH meter. The electronics are not difficult. It's all about the probe. I've had this meter, it's about a $600 meter. I've had this meter for 8 years. I've been through 3 probes. I broke one. Another one went bad. And the probe costs about $180. But this meter is stable and accurate. Every year before winemaking season, I get together with a buddy of mine, and he's got a benchtop meter in his winery, and we calibrate our meters together. And it's a good chance for me to go over there and see how his Pinot tastes in his barrels, and for to do some shop talk. But at the same time, we calibrate and keep calibrating until both meters read the same. Actually, this meter's been more stable than his benchtop Hannah. But so this meter's always been good to me. And if you have an older meter, you can actually use a relatively old meter, even 20-year-old meter, and put a new probe on it. I mean, it may or may not work, but most of the time, it's all about the probe. The electronics they last a long time, as long as the thing hasn't been abused. So I'm going to carefully, things are easy to break, I'm going to rinse it in distilled water. I already have it turned on. This is the temperature probe. This particular unit is temperature graduated, so it reads out the temperature and the pH. Yeah, this thing dials in really quickly. The temperature is 57 degrees. That's pretty good for cold soak. It could be colder. I'm doing cold soak, a pre-fermentation maceration now on the Malbec, and the pH is 3.57. Okay. That's a pretty good pH. I get a lot of high pH fruit here in Washington State. Eastern Washington, the grapes really ripen. And so I have to deal with a lot of high alcohol, high pH fruit. So that's a pretty accurate way of getting a reading. It's easy. But it is a bit of a conundrum if you don't have a good pH meter. A lot of wineries, most wineries have a good pH meter, but a lot of them don't titrate. They send that out to a lab. Because titration, sure, you can do titration, but you have to buy new reagents every year and fuss around with the equipment, and how good are you at doing it compared to a person that does it all day long, every day of the week? So a lot of wineries send out their titration to the lab, and they get the pH reading at the same time for different batches of wine. And just remember, all of this is in my book, Creating World-Class Red Wine.